Mitakiapi. Hello, my relatives. My name is Fern Naomi Renville, and I am Dakota. I'm going to share a story with you. It's my Dakota origin story that explains why I greeted you as relatives. In the beginning, before any of this was here, there were only two forces in the universe. There was Ia, the creative force. All of the creative power in the universe was held in this being named Ia, who was like a cloud, kind of formless without shape. The other force in the universe was Hahepi, the great nothing, the female spirit. These two spirits, she who possessed all the creative potential of the universe, and he who possessed all the creative power of the universe. They wanted a family. Yes, just like you and I. Well, Ea realized that they alone possessed this creative power and that they alone could bring these beings into the world. They also knew that they would have to relinquish some of their creative power. And so Ea reached inside themselves and took out most of this power, this creative power that they possessed, and they shaped it in their hands like a ball of clay. Yes. And they took that ball and placed it into Hahepi, the great nothing, the female spirit. And thus was Mother Earth born, Inamakoche, or Inamaka. And then Ea reached inside themselves and took out the rest of their power and created the rest of the universe, the moon and the sun and the spirits and the stars, so that Mother Earth would not be in the dark and in the cold. And then Ea, having given away all of their creative power, opened their veins and let their blood flow out, the last thing they had to give. Now, Ea's blood was blue. Yes, just like water. This blue blood poured out of Ea's veins and onto the surface of that newborn grandmother Earth. And half that blue blood covered her surface and became the first floodwaters. The other half of this blue blood poured up into the sky and became the atmosphere that we breathe today that protects us. And then, having given away all of their power, having given away everything that they possessed, Ea became as we know them now. Ea, the rock, was now small and shriveled and gray and hard and powerless. Ea, the rock, fell to the surface of Grandmother Earth and became the first rock. And from these two, from Grandfather Rock and Grandmother Earth, all of us were born, all living things on Earth, not just the humans, not just the animals, not just the plants, but the water, the soil, everything. We are all the children of Ea and Grandmother Earth. And therefore we were all related to one another. And we have relationships to one another. That's what makes a family. You are in a relationship. You're not strangers. And so you are my relatives. You are my relatives. And what happens to me happens to you. In this Dakota Genesis story, this Dakota origin story, our Creator retains no power over us and gives us free will, creates each of us out of original spirit. The messages that this communicates to me, the way that this connects me to you and to my family and the earth as relatives. That's what this story gives me. This is my Dakota origin story. This is why I greet you as relatives. And this is why I am greeting you this morning. I apologize for my partner not being able to be here. Roger Fernandez is having some tech issues, but he's hopefully going to be able to join us a little later. I am going to share a story with you now that he would be sharing with you if he were here and on his behalf. And it's a story that comes from this part of the world where I also, like yourself, am a guest on Coast Salish lands. And this story speaks to the same idea because Mitakuye Oyasin, we are all related, is not just a Dakota idea. Chief Seattle's words to the effect of, we are not, the land does not belong to us. The earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth. That idea is very, very present and profound in this part of the world as well. This story is called How Stinging Nettles Saved the People. And it is a story about, well, let me share it with you. Pardon me, one sec. It is a story from this part of the world. The Coast Salish people tell this story. A long time ago, out on the coast, out on the peninsula, there was a village. And in that village, the people lived in fear. The people were always looking over their shoulders, always wondering when danger would show up. They would have their supplies ready to go and hide in the forest if need be. Why was everyone living in fear? Everyone was living in fear because from time to time, from up the coast, war canoes would come. These war canoes came from the north, and these people would come into the Coast Salish villages and take whatever they wanted, including slaves. And so the people lived in fear. In this village lived a young woman. This young woman wished that she did not have to live in fear. She wished that her village did not have to live in fear. She was afraid of being tired, afraid of being, or tired of being afraid, excuse me. She decided that she needed to do something. So she prayed before she went to sleep. She prayed, what can I do to lift this fear from my people? And when she fell asleep, in a dream, she was visited by the spirit of the nettle plant. And this nettle plant said to her, young woman, go into the forest and gather my leaves. Take them and make a tea and drink the tea with your village, with your people. And when you drink the tea, say to yourselves all together aloud, we will be strong for our ancestors. We will be strong for our people. We will be strong for the ones to come. The young woman woke up from this dream, and because her people knew that wisdom and knowledge comes from the plant spirits, she shared this dream, this vision, and went into the woods and gathered the nettle leaves and brought them back to her village and built a fire and heated stones and filled a big watertight basket full of water. And she put those leaves in that water. And when those rocks were white hot, she put them in that boiling in the basket. And that's how the tea was made. Now, when that tea had steeped and it was ready to be drunk, the whole village came around and everyone drank that tea. And as they drank it, everyone said together in one voice, "We will be strong for our ancestors. We will be strong for our people. We will be strong for the ones to come." Now, as the people drank this tea, because as you know, nettle has power from the earth, they could feel the strength of the plant entering them, and they felt stronger. Well, a couple nights later, the same young woman was visited again in her dreams by the spirit of the nettle plant. And this time, the nettle plant said, "Young woman, now take your bravest villagers and go into the woods and find me. Take the nettle plant, take my whole plant and flog yourself with me. And as you feel the power of my stinging nettle go into your body, say to yourselves all together, we will be strong for our ancestors. We will be strong for our people. We will be strong for the ones to come." Well, when the young woman woke up and shared this dream with her village, there were not a ton of people immediately volunteering, but there were people in the village who volunteered for this. Now, I don't know if you've ever had an intimate encounter with a nettle, but if you have, you probably remember it. It is quite painful, and it's an instant sting that the plant can deliver to you. This young woman found that there were actually quite a few brave people in her village, and they weren't all men either. These brave people went into the woods, and of course, the whole village followed along because everyone wanted to watch. They found the nettle plant. They found the nettle plant, and they took that nettle plant and they flogged themselves, just like the nettle spirit had instructed. Now, this was quite painful. And just as they had been told, as they felt the powerful sting of the nettle enter into their bodies, this young woman and the others called out all together, "We will be strong for our ancestors. Ouch! We will be strong for our people. Ah! We will be strong for the ones to come. Ouch!" Well, like I said, the whole village didn't participate in this, but the whole village watched, and everyone was impressed with the courage of those who did volunteer to be flogged. Now, one thing you should know is that flogging is actually beneficial. Mhm. It causes anti-inflammatories to come to the part of your body that's been flogged and heal inflammation. It is a powerful medicine in its own, flogging. Well, like I said, everyone in the village felt stronger to have witnessed the courage of the people in this village. And it's a good thing, too, because just a few days later, word came from the north that the canoes had been seen and they were coming down the coast. Now, in the past, the people would have all hidden. They would have gone to their hiding places. But this time, the people did not hide. They did not run. This time, oh, my apologies. I'm going to slow down just a bit. This time, the people did not hide. They were afraid still, but they did not run and hide. This time, everyone in the village gathered down on the beach. They gathered down on the beach, and when those war canoes from the north were seen, the whole village was standing shoulder to shoulder on the beach, waiting for those canoes to arrive. Everyone in the village had whatever weapon they could find. And when that canoe appeared on the horizon, the people, all together, shoulder to shoulder, said in one loud voice, "We will be strong for our ancestors. We will be strong for our people. We will be strong for the ones to come." Now, when you are on the water, your voices carry really far. And those people in those canoes who were approaching, when they saw the whole village standing shoulder to shoulder on the beach, and when they heard those voices raised as one, that sound carried out to them. The people in the canoes stopped, and they turned around and went to a different village. They knew that this was not going to be a place where they could easily come in and take whatever they wanted. And so they went elsewhere, and they never returned to this village. And so this is why the people tell the story of how Nettle saved the people. And it is now 9:59. Okay. I am going to turn this over to our next presenter, but I want to tell you that we will come back and we will talk again about this story and about what you folks will be doing together today. I thank you for letting me share this story. And once again, I apologize for Roger not being able to be here. And thank you, Roger, for letting me share this story. Whoopie-da.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and so much thanks to Fern for being here to share the stories of her people and her tradition, and that of the Coast Salish people, and for Roger as well, who we're hoping will be able to join us later this afternoon. Right now, I believe that we are going to be transitioning over to Callahan Domingo, who's going to help set some grounding for today. So if you can wait with us for just a moment, we should be able to get Kai onto the stage.
Good morning, everybody. I think that I'm here. I am honestly really challenged by this virtual world. I know that we've had 18 months to step into it, and it still surprises me every time I'm navigating it. So I'm an in-person person, and I thank you all for being here. I think that I'm here. I am honestly really challenged by this virtual world. I know that we've had 18 months to step into it, and okay, I got the feedback from my other screen. So I think that I'm on stage presenting. I just want to extend my gratitude again to thank Fern for joining us and sharing her story, and for Roger for attempting to also navigate through this virtual stage. I am just going to see if somebody from our team can let me know if there are slides that are being presented alongside me. Yes, great. Okay, thank you. So today I'm going to be opening up our conversation that we're going to have today. And I thank you all for joining us and for being with us today. It's been a long road to get here. We originally wanted to be in person and are continuing to respond and meet the moment that we're in. So here we are virtually. I want to start by just acknowledging that there is a lot going on in the world, and we're bringing all of that with us. And I hope Fern created an opportunity for us to all ground ourselves into this moment. But please, as we're going throughout the day, take care of yourself. If you need to step out and return, if you're having tech challenges, stay with us. And thank you so much to the folks in the chat who are cheering us on and problem solving alongside of us. As we get started, I want to first acknowledge the land that we're on and thank our partners, Seattle Urban Native Nonprofit Sun, for sharing this land acknowledgement with us. So today we acknowledge that we are in the homeland of the first people of this land, the Duwamish, Muckleshoot, Puyallup, Snoqualmie, Stillaguamish, Suquamish, and Tulalip tribes. We raise our hands to honor all of the descendants of the Coast Salish people. We thank them for their hospitality as the first peoples of this land and for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. We honor the immense, immeasurable, and often unrecognized contributions and sacrifices of the Coast Salish and Indigenous people. And we acknowledge the ongoing disparities, racism, and political invisibility experienced by the Coast Salish and Indigenous people of this land. Within our planning team and COO, we know that it's important not just to acknowledge, but to also center Native and Indigenous voices, leadership, and projects. We honor and thank our Native and Indigenous wisdom that is being shared today and during our events, and the current and historical work that is to build and shift power toward Native and Indigenous-led movements. So today, thank you so much for joining us. This event that we're holding has been planned over the last year, and as we are currently responding to the ever-shifting transitions, we have really thought about how do we actually honor this moment that we're in and really honor the work that all of you are doing. You're continuing to respond, resist, and reshape the current systems that we're living in. These complex times require us to use new strategies, to lean into our relationships, and to deepen our practices. And so today we're going to be leaning into a conversation about the ways that we can continue to center those who are most impacted by our inequitable society, how we can work together to create transformative change and strengthen our relationships. We draw inspiration from so many of you, and we've also leaned into some national thought leaders such as Adrienne Marie Brown, who reminds us that there's a conversation in this room today that only we can have. Egeris Dixon, who has been guiding some of our COO work around thinking about conflict and the ways that we can use it to actually generate deeper alignment and deeper power within our relationships. And John A. Powell, who's worked on creating more belonging within our society. How can we create more bridges? And really today is about us thinking creatively and learning from each other about how we can create more just, equitable, and loving communities. Next slide. So just to ground us in who is holding this event today, I, Kalayan Domingo, I'm a staff member with Communities of Opportunity. I am the lead for our learning community, which is one of our strategies. Communities of Opportunity is a public-private initiative between King County and Seattle Foundation, funded through the Best Starts for Kids initiative. And we support community partners to advance health, safe and affordable housing, increased economic opportunity, and stronger community connections. It is this strategy, the learning community, that is holding space for this event today. Our learning community is both about supporting learning of our funded partners, and as well as all of us who are looking to design and scale community solutions for greater social, economic, and racial equity. We do this through a series of activities and resources that encourage shared learning, building critical relationships, building the capacity of leaders, organizations, and partnerships, and creating new tools and models to actualize the thriving communities we envision. I want to extend a thank you to the many COO learning community consultants who are here today moderating and facilitating many of our sessions. So why are we here today? What are our goals? Next slide. So over the last 6 years, many of our COO partners have been working within King County, really testing new models, building strong partnerships, and changing the systems that we're working in. We want to celebrate that work, uplift it, and create opportunities for us to learn from each other through the work that's happening in COO partners, but also the work that's happening in our larger community, locally, statewide, nationally. There's so much to learn from each other. We also want to name and explore strategies to address and dismantle anti-Blackness as individuals, organizations, and as a community. Anti-Blackness pervades every aspect of our society. It's present in every one of our communities, and we all have a role to play within our personal relationships, organizational, institutional levels. This work is a precursor to our final goal of the day, which is creating a community of belonging. Our lives and work are interconnected, and the stories that Fern just shared really spoke to that. In our time together, we hope to share learnings on how we can strengthen our collective culture to create more inclusivity and interdependence. We hope that today we feel connected through this shared experience and move to continue to build on these connections. You will see these themes interwoven throughout all of our conversations, and we're building out intentional spaces for us to continue after this event. The work of dismantling anti-Blackness and building community is continual and ongoing and requires us all to commit to practice individually and collectively. We hope for us to enter this conversation with curiosity and to open ourselves to the learnings and stories that we're receiving today. There's so much wisdom in our communities, so much to learn from each other, and so much opportunity for us to build together. While we were hoping that we could be in person, we are not. And we did pick a platform where we can be together. So continue to use the chat, continue to message people. If you see someone that you haven't seen in a while, reach out to them and start to build our community from this event and into the future. I want to introduce now a good friend and partner in the learning community, Sarah Tran, who will be taking us to our next session and introducing our keynote speaker. Sarah Tran has been working with COO over the last 3 years. Sarah has been working on building capacity building strategies and activities for our COO and broader community to strengthen our collective social justice work. I'm honored to work alongside Sarah, and Sarah has been a core component of this team planning this event and has really worked with our community advisory committee, who has been instrumental in identifying the themes that we want to uplift and the ways in which we want to practice being together in this event and in our future activities. So Sarah, thank you for joining us. Thank you for bringing your wisdom. And Sarah will guide us through the remainder of the day, weaving together our learnings and helping us navigate this platform as well. Though I know Sarah and I both do better in person, she will be taking us through the rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kai. It is such an honor to work alongside you and so many other brilliant people on our team and a part of our COO community. And with that, I include all of you who are in this gathering with us today. I wish that we could be in person. I wish that we could be sharing food with one another, exchanging hugs, sharing story. And yet I'm glad that despite all of the challenges of this time, that we are still able to gather, that we can come together, that we are able to share what we are learning and experiencing and discovering, both in terms of the struggles that we face and in terms of the successes, the wins that we achieve day by day by our very survival and by everything that we do to uplift our communities. And so, with that, I want to say again, welcome, good morning. It is a distinct pleasure and honor to be with you, and as Fern said, with my relatives. I hope that today, despite being in a virtual atmosphere, that we will actually be able to deepen our relationships with one another, meeting again with old friends, as well as establishing relationships with new ones, and with new folks in our community who can become comrades in the organizing that we do as we try to bring about the just future that we envision for ourselves, our loved ones, and all of our communities. I would like to start by introducing our esteemed keynote speaker, Autumn Brown. Before I share a short version of Autumn's biography, I just want to say that on our planning team, when we first heard that Autumn had said yes to joining our gathering today and helping to ground us and set the tone for our time together, there was a whole flurry of emails late at night going yes in all capital letters, with butterflies in our stomachs and that palpable relief that is almost like when you ask someone on a first date and they say yes to you. Because I think in so many ways, Autumn is the perfect person to help us set the intention with which I hope that we can engage with one another today. Autumn is a mother, organizer, theologian, artist, and facilitator, the youngest child of an interracial marriage rooted in the complex lineages of counter-culturalism and the military-industrial complex. Autumn is a queer, mixed-race Black woman who identifies closely with her African and European lineages, and a gifted facilitator who grounds her work in healing from the trauma of oppression. Autumn is involved with many different organizations across our country, but one that I particularly wanted to point out was her role with the Anti-Oppression Resource and Training Alliance, AORTA. And the reason that I particularly wanted to draw that out is because I was very struck by how AORTA shares that we are living in times of interlocking political, economic, and ecological upheaval. That today's social movements need greater connection to local, regional, national, and global movement history in order to dispel a sense of isolation, alienation, and competition. I know from the many conversations that I've had the privilege to be a part of with our COO partners that these are forces that are constantly trying to tear us apart, that we battle each day as we strive to make our communities a safer, more just, and more humane place, and in our relationship with Mother Earth. And so I'm hopeful that having Autumn today will set us off on just the right note to engage and share and listen and learn as we embark on the incredible lineup of presentations and sessions that we have in store today. And so with that, I would like to welcome Autumn to the stage and thank her again for being here with us.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. And I am just so grateful to be here with all of you. I wish I could see your faces, how I wish I could see your faces. I wish that I could hear your voices and hear the music of your laughter together and your tears. So here I am. I am joining you from my apartment in Minneapolis. on Dakota and Anishinaabe land in Minnesota, and what I like to call the epicenter of the uprising. I was so excited. I'm going to start off with a little bit of a joke. I was so excited when I talked to the organizers for this event about this event. I was like, I've never been to King County, but I feel like I kind of know about it because I watched all 4 seasons of The Killing. And then one of the organizers gently reminded me that, in fact, all of the episodes of that TV show were filmed in Vancouver. So yes, so I've actually never been to your home, to where you are, but I feel a home with you, and I hope you can feel a home with me. All right, so I'm just gonna jump right in. I tend to approach these kinds of events pretty organically. So I'm going to talk for a while. I like talking. I love the sound of my own voice. So I'm going to talk for a while, but I'm probably not going to talk for 45 minutes. My hope is to be able to end my part of the speaking early enough so that we can actually engage with one another, so that you all can ask some questions or offer some ideas into the space that I can then respond to and respond with. All right, here we go. I wanted to offer some framing for what I've come to share with you today, and how I've come to know the things that I know. I want you to know, as I enter this conversation with you, I want you to know what I come from as we meet this moment. I spent the better part of the last year and a half as the primary caregiver for my 3 children, the primary adult caring for my 3 children. And what I witnessed was my children inheriting a world on fire. What I witnessed was them learning that this was their world, the only world they would live in, the world that they would eventually die in. More than at any point in history, we are aware of the devastation we have wrought upon the earth. But unlike any point in human history, we can actually feel the world folding us in. I think many of us at times, depending on the particular climate catastrophe we may be following on the news or living through in our communities, it may feel like the earth is turning on us. But I think a better frame for it is folding us in and humbling us in the face of her awesome power. And our children have been born inside this great folding in. My children, your children, the children in your lives, they will live and die inside this great folding in. And it's the only world they will know. But this is not a tragedy. And only our collective resilience in the face of what is can help us deal with this reality and help them deal with their reality. So it is from that knowing that I'm speaking to you today. In preparation for being with you all, I returned to a piece of writing that I started about a year ago. I finished it and published it in January on Inauguration Day, January 2021. But I actually started writing this piece about a year ago, almost exactly. And it's about, the title of the piece is White Danger. And it's about the dangers that whiteness and white supremacy poses to Black people in particular, but people of color generally. And one of the particular dangers, one of the ways that their danger manifests this concept that I was writing about of double-mindedness. On the one hand, being able to cause incredible harm, and on the other hand, being unaware of causing harm, and to some extent being in complete denial about the harm that one has caused, of that sort of split consciousness that we often experience when people cause harm and are confronted by the harm that they've caused. And I return to this piece because towards the end of the essay, I remember just writing a series of questions about what this means for us as people of color. What does this mean for us as Black people? What are we called to do? How are we called to face this danger? And I want to say too that this particular type of danger, double-mindedness, the split consciousness, I think that you can find those exact same behaviors across all types of harm doing. I don't think it's at all unique to white supremacy. But I was writing about it from that particular vantage point of having navigated white supremacy and harm caused by white people specifically. And I was just thinking again about, well, what am I to do with that information? If I take full responsibility for my life, what am I called to do? And I was thinking about that in relationship to the theme of this event, the meeting the moment, and how to some degree, meeting the moment is actually about turning and facing ourselves. That it's not always about meeting what is around us, but what is within us. It's so easy to stay external, to stay external in our concerns and stay external in how we address those concerns. It's so much harder to actually turn the gaze back on ourselves and consider ourselves. We meet ourselves every day, but how do we meet ourselves? Over the last several years of my life, I've gone through this sea change in how I meet myself. And it has restructured every aspect of my life, from my work to my parenting, to my body, to my most intimate relationships. And part of this change, this sea change that I went through, was that, I had understood myself as a survivor, as a victim, but also as a survivor. And part of my journey was about meeting myself as a survivor of harm and violence. But the change came about as I decided more and more to meet myself as a powerful being. And I say being, not person, but like powerful being in that, like, I am. I be, right? I am a powerful being. I have life force moving through my body at all times. And that force that's inside me, other people can feel it, just like I can feel the force that's inside of others. So I started changing. I started changing inside, and I started changing, and that change, that internal change, some of which were small adjustments, some of which were enormous, terrifying leaps, that I began changing. And I came to that moment of change, that, the rupture between who I was and who I was becoming. I came to that in large part through the revolutionary practice of Black feminism. And I wanted to talk to you all about that because I know that one of the threads that you all are going to be pulling over the course of this day is about dismantling anti-Blackness. You're looking at all the things that I have the most curiosity about today, right? Climate justice, healing, dismantling anti-Blackness, and what all of those things have to do with one another. And I know inside of me that the practice that I found that helped me find a way, a path through which I can understand all of these equally important issues, that has been Black feminism. So I wanted to talk with you all a little bit about how I became a Black feminist and how I understand what Black feminism is. And then I wanted to share with you all some of the lessons that I've drawn from Black feminism for this time that we're living through right now. Lessons that I hope will be of use to you today as you move through the conversations that you're going to be having with each other. Lessons that I do believe are directly related to this question of how we meet the moment, which again, for me, is reframed as how we meet ourselves. So I wasn't born a Black feminist, right? I was born a mixed race Black woman with a lot of, a long journey that I have been on and continue to go on and will always be on, relating to my identity, my culture, how I relate to my Blackness, right? But from pretty early in my career, I was doing work around white supremacy. I was doing work around whiteness. And there came a point in my career where I really wanted to be doing spirit-based work. I wanted to be doing work that was, you know, grounded in something greater than myself, greater than my own analysis. And I wanted to be doing work that was allowing my soul to be in connection with the souls of other people that I was partnering with. And I will say, from a practical standpoint, there was also a desire and need to do work that was not centering the white gaze or a white person's learning process. You know, I wanted to be doing work that was by, for, and about the experience of people like me. And I wanted it to be situated inside my experience as a mixed race Black woman also. And I think in part because I was putting that intention out into the world, you know, Black feminist practice came and got me. And I first encountered it through poetry, which I think is no accident. And over time, as I dove more deeply into the tradition of Black feminism, I found this rich, you know, history, analysis, literary tradition, theoretical tradition, poetry tradition, music tradition, and storytelling tradition. And I wanted to offer that to you all today as, you know, I mean, part of it is just an invitation to go and learn from Black feminists. Go and learn about Black feminism, Black feminisms, because it is a incredibly varied and rich tradition. But go and learn because for me, Black feminism is how we liberate ourselves from vicious cycles of oppression, marginalization, and horizontal violence. And by that, I mean the violence that we do to one another laterally, because we don't feel like we have agency and power to stop the harm that's coming from above upon us, right? So that the need to act in response, to aggress in response to aggression, because we're often being halted in our ability to take those actions, it comes out sideways. And so we do violence to one another and we rupture relationships with one another. I mean, I'm sure many of you in the room today have had the experience of having, being inside of ruptured relationships with people whom you know that you actually need to be in solidarity with, right? That's horizontal violence, or that's one of the outcomes. So for me, Black feminism, it's a rigorous practice. It's deeply personal. You know, at its heart, it recognizes that, you know, the unique position of the bodies of Black women and femmes in history, the unique ways that our bodies are subjugated inside of American society, means that if repair for us is cared for, if changes on our behalf are taken, if we remodel our societies and institutions through the lens of what Black women need, the natural outcome of that is that everyone's lives improve, right? So it's not oppression Olympics. It's just recognizing, you know, the unique impact at all of the intersections, right? And starting from that place. And it actually, it works on a structural and institutional level because it provokes a different set of questions that really push aside the barrier of comparative suffering and, you know, who is the worst off, who is the most oppressed, that inhibits so much of our equity and justice work. And I think one of the reasons why Black feminism is successful in that regard is that it really, Black feminism as a tradition recognizes that slavery and the ideology of slavery sits at the beating heart of everything. That subjugation itself as an ideology touches every aspect of our lives, from land and agriculture to reproduction to child rearing to institutions of the state. And that there are lessons that we take from the body and the body's survival inside of that subjugation, and that those lessons can be made fractal. We can take a lesson from the smallest unit, right? The unit of the body, and map those lessons out onto the unit of relationship, the unit of community, the unity of organization, the unit of region, and the unit of society. Black feminism, in my experience, is also about joy and connection and healing. One of the Black feminists, one of the contemporary Black feminists whose work I just love and have learned so much from is Monica Dennis, who created this model called the Wheel of Oppression and Liberation. And she uses it to describe how oppression and systems of oppression, they disconnect us from source. They disengage our emotions. They distort our stories. They dissociate us from our bodies. And she invites us to consider how healing in our bodies and connection and right relationship with each other and with the land, how those are the ways that we actually make true repair. But here's the challenging part about this whole model, right? And the challenge of, I think, what Black feminism invites us to do, which is a recognition that no one else can do this for us. No one else can give it to us. No one but ourselves can give us this healing, this connection, this freedom. Complaining won't give it to us. Fighting won't give it to us. Even organizing oftentimes won't give it to us unless we're doing it from a holistic perspective. You know, so when the great teacher, Grace Lee Boggs, said that we must transform ourselves to transform the world, she wasn't being glib or corny. You know, she was recognizing that there is no transformed world without human beings who know how to live in that world. There is no transformed world without human beings who know how to live in that world. Right now, all those of us who are fighting for justice, whose life's work is about creating that other world, we exist inside of organizations and communities and movements that are plagued by infighting and trauma reenactments. And those are some of our clearest indicators that we don't yet know how to live in that next world. And maybe we haven't even earned our place in it. But I don't think it's too late for us. So that's where I come to the lessons of Black feminism for this time. And these are just the lessons that I draw, right? Someone else might look at these tools, these technologies, these writings, these theories, and draw a whole different set of lessons, but these are the lessons that I draw. Um, and before I go into the lessons, I just want to name that, I know that you all are tired. I know what you've been living through because I've been living through it too. And I know that you're here because you want to organize, because you want to heal, because you want justice. And I know that you're also here because you're dealing with a set of challenges, challenges that come from within and challenges that come from without. When you work in community, when you work in partnership, there are very unique challenges that come with that kind of work. So many of us, we show up to partnership, we show up to coalition, we show up to community work, and we are, at least in part, guided by our fear in how we show up to those spaces, how we meet those spaces. As much as we are guided by love for our people, we are also in part guided by fear. We're afraid to be betrayed. We're afraid to be abandoned. We're afraid to take a risk. We're afraid to be vulnerable. And all of those things, those are sane responses. Black feminism offers us a set of lessons to guide us into a different way to meet those same challenges and those same conditions. And some of what I'm about to share may not, it might not land well. Some of it is not necessarily the most popular or accepted way of thinking about this, but this is where I sit from my vantage point. The first lesson that I draw is a lesson about boundaries. Living under chronically oppressive conditions, we get trained to cede our power before it can even be taken from us, because we are so so conditioned and so patterned towards the idea that we don't actually have power, or any power that we have is fleeting. So there is some level of conditioning to cede our power, right? Sometimes we cede our power to protect ourselves. Sometimes we cede our power because we're collapsing. Sometimes we cede our power because we're afraid. This is something that, living under white supremacy and living under racial capitalism, living under patriarchy, these are outcomes of those conditions, right? It's not our fault that this is, that some of these tendencies have been conditioned in us. But we have to begin taking back responsibility for ourselves. And part of how we do that is by understanding ourselves as having power. I love the Alice Walker quote that the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. It's no accident that we think we don't have power. But it's also not true. So what that has to do with boundaries, in my experience, especially right now, is understanding of who is responsible for a boundary. Who is responsible for my boundary? And the lesson that I draw is that our boundaries are actually our own boundaries to hold. They are not other people's boundaries to hold for us. If I have a boundary, it's mine to hold. It's not someone else's responsibility to hold my boundary for me. Why wouldn't I hold my own boundary? The only reason I wouldn't hold my own boundary is, well, there might be a couple of reasons. It may be that I don't know what my own boundaries are, but it also may be that I fear being punished for having a boundary in the first place. But for me, learning to find my own boundary, learning to set the boundary between myself and others, to hold it, and then to celebrate the fact that I did that. That has been one of the primary ways that I've become familiar with my power, because I know where I am. My boundary lets me know where I am. So increasingly, I think in our culture, we get really obsessed about whether other people respect our boundaries, whether other people know about our boundaries. And again, it might not be a popular statement, but I think we have to find our boundary first, and we have to be willing to hold it. And increasingly, as I do this work more and more, I find that I am not afraid of anyone. Sometimes I am afraid of myself. You know, the more powerful I become and the more responsible for my own life I become, the more I understand that I can, in fact, co-create the conditions of my own suffering. It's not to say that I create or cause my own pain, right? Pain is a fact of life, especially when you live under oppression. I'm not creating my own pain, but I am co-creating some of my suffering by accepting conditions instead of rising against them, right? So for me, a part of my journey to freedom at this time in my life has been about letting myself expand and fill up, you know, and then doing that collectively with others, letting ourselves expand and fill up space and understand how we sit in space and feel the power of the way we sit in space. And knowing where I end, knowing where my collective ends, knowing what can enter and what can't. So this lesson for me relates to the second lesson. This lesson about boundaries relates to the second lesson that I think Black feminism offers for this time and how we meet the moment, which is about the fragility we experience in our communities right now, the fragility and reactivity. That fragility and reactivity are the natural outcomes of a world on fire, but they are not a steady state. Fragility and reactivity, these are symptoms. We need to move through them. We need to heal from them, but we don't want to live there. But it is not a steady state to be reactive. We're living through a slow burn. We're living through this moment where, you know, people often talk, particularly when people talk about climate change and human inaction, they tell that story about the frog that's sitting in the pot, and the water in the pot is boiling, it's coming to a boil, but the frog can't feel it. And so by the time it's boiling, the frog is dead because it didn't jump out, right? And we're in this interesting moment in history where the water in the pot is reaching a roiling boil and we didn't get out. And it's not like we didn't get out because we didn't know it was happening. Like, we knew it was happening. We didn't get out. But I think the interesting thing about heat and fire in that metaphor is that fire does not only destroy, it also transforms and renews. So if we weren't meant to get out of the pot, then I think we have to consider that something about us is changing. Something about who we are is changing. Like, we are sloughing something off. The fire is actually stripping something from us. The heat is stripping something from us, something that perhaps we don't need anymore. And, you know, I think about the fire of pain in this way. There's this beautiful quote from a memoir that was recently written by this white woman, Christian woman, Glennon Doyle, who basically like realized she was gay and had to leave her marriage and dismantle her whole life in order to be able to like be with her wife. And She says in her memoir, "What I thought would kill me didn't. The fire of pain won't consume me. I can burn and burn and live. I can live on fire." And I think about that, about there is, when we go through extraordinary pain in our lives, when we move through that fire, we are always transformed on the other side of it. And we are able to survive it. So what that has to do with this, the question of fragility and reactivity, is that, we're entering this time of, stripping away. We're in the stripping away. We're in the fire. And yet inside of our communities and many of our social justice spaces and organizations and networks, we experience this incredible fragility and reactivity that I think is happening because we are so afraid to be hurt. We're afraid to feel that pain. We're afraid to feel the pain of hurt. So from a Black feminist standpoint, we are invited into a different practice, a practice that actually helps us meet a world that's on fire, to help us move through that fire to a steady state. One of the practices that I really love comes from a Black feminist teacher, leader named Tanya Lee, called Principled Struggle. And she articulated this a few years ago, and it's been making the rounds. Hopefully you all have seen something like this. But she articulates a really different practice for how we meet one another and how we navigate pain, how we navigate struggle together, how we navigate conflict. And so much of what's in this framework is really about taking full responsibility for ourselves and how we are experiencing our own bodies, minds, our own pain. So in the framework of principled struggle, what Tanya Lee says is that we have to struggle for the sake of deepening our collective understanding and getting to greater unity, that we have to be honest and direct while holding compassion, that we take responsibility for our own feelings and actions, which is one of the hardest principles, I think, for us to practice, because so many of us were socialized to believe that other people make us feel feelings, right? So the idea that other people aren't making me feel feelings, like, that's pretty foreign. It takes a while to practice that. She says that we have to seek deeper understanding. So we have to ask and read first before we move from our assumptions. She says that we have to consider that this may or may not be the container to hold what we need to bring. So that could be this meeting, it could be this organization, it could be this conference, it could be this network, it could be this coalition, it could be this community, may not be the container to hold what you need to bring. And she also says that side conversations and one-to-ones should be helping to get us to better understanding, not check out, not disorganizing ourselves, right? We should never be having one-to-ones just to be petty or reinforce our own assumptions and narratives about one another, but only to help us re-enter relationship. And that's a really different practice than the reactivity that we see across so many of our spaces, which is, you did something wrong and this relationship is over, right? Or putting so many rules and boundaries in place between myself and another person that there's no room for an actual relationship to even build, right? So this framework is saying we actually have to struggle together. Struggling together means like being really, really, really aware of our differences, not being afraid of them, and definitely not being afraid of the pain that might arise because of the fact that we're different. I just want to share two more lessons and then I'll stop so that we can move into Q&A. The third lesson is that accountability is not a performance, it's a way of life. So there's a way that the term accountability is being used in our movements right now that's not really the same as what accountability actually is and what it actually means. In my lived experience, accountability is not, it's not a public statement. It's not a performance of learning. It's a rebuilding of relationship after rupture. It's a humbling of oneself to larger forces. And it's also learning to move with one another. And we have to learn this skill, if we're going to meet this moment. We have to learn the skill of being accountable to one another, because we have to stop behaving as if we have another choice than to be together through this time. We have to begin from a recognition that harm is not an outlier experience in our lives or in our communities. We live inside of multiple systems of oppression. Those systems rely on mechanisms of harm to control our bodies. And they also rely on our orientation to ourselves as victims of that harm, right? That doesn't make us responsible for the harm that's being done to us, but we are responsible for how we respond, right? And whether that response increases harm or heals it. So if we know about one of the things we know for sure about accountability is it can only happen in relationship. It can only happen in relationship. And so if our response when harm happens is only ever to distance, and we see this all the time, right? We see this in our communities, that when harm happens and we know that it's happening, so many people they won't go towards it. They will go away, right? So I'm not just talking about the accountability between two individuals. I mean, accountability of the community as a whole. If accountability happens in relationship, it means that we all have to go towards it together as a community, right? And that experience gives us some actual resilience in the face of harm, in the face of pain, in the face of loss of control. Okay, final lesson is about spiritual rigor. We are, I was so glad when Sarah read the statement from AORTA at the top of the hour about the time of great upheaval that we are living through. And the challenge of that upheaval is that we want control. We really want control. But we are likely not going to experience a sense of control over our environment. Not necessarily in our lifetime. So we need to have practices that meet the time we are in, not the time that we wish that we were in. And this is a time of loss of control of our environment, of our economy, of a even stable sense of what it means to have a successful life, right? There's a surrender that's happening, letting go of the shoreline that is happening. And my belief is that it is practices that give us a spiritual rigor that will help us be in that great folding in without grasping tighter and tighter to what was, but surrendering to what is and surrendering to what can be. And Black feminism reminds us that, yes, we are precious individuals, but we are also a precious collective source of wisdom, history, tradition, and culture. And we actually can sustain those things that are most precious about our lives. But we have to be willing to let go of what was and what we were so that we can become who we need to be. Okay. I'm going to pause there so that we actually have time for some questions. There I was saying that I wasn't going to talk for 45 minutes, but I think I still did. So I don't know. I can't see if there have been any comments or anything. I can't see it. Oh, I see. There's a whole comment thread. Oh, wow. Okay, there are a bunch of things in the chat. But I'm not even going to try to read that. I'm just going to pause and let our moderator jump back in and figure out if there's time for us to take some questions. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Autumn. I did not know I was the moderator, but here I am.
Welcome back.
Thank you so much for that incredible sharing of spirit and wisdom and vulnerable experience. I mean, it's such a blessing to be in this space with you. And I know you weren't able to see the comments as you were speaking, but I definitely was able to watch it resonate with folks, and people chiming in with the own ways that they're seeing that show up in their lives and what they're experiencing. And so I am so glad that we do have about 15 more minutes, I think, for us to be able to take some questions, thoughts, resonances from this time. I'm not quite sure how we're doing that, because again, I didn't know I was moderating this part.
You maybe weren't. Maybe someone else was, but now you're.
Perhaps. And this is what happens when you're virtually backstage. Is somehow I keep popping up on stage. But I would welcome folks to put their questions in the comment thread. It looks like it should be on the far right of your screen. And then I will share those questions to Autumn. And then Autumn, if you could let us know what some of your thoughts are in response. So our first question is from Elizabeth, who's asking, Autumn, can you say more about moving towards danger and give an example?
I think maybe you're referring to the part where I was talking about when harm happens, how as a community we need to move towards it instead of moving away. And I'm wanting to be really specific in saying that I was talking about when harm occurs, less so talking about like put yourself in danger. But that I think and I can say this a little bit from my own, I guess I can speak a little bit from my own experience. So I don't often talk about like the conditions of my divorce publicly, but I'm kind of like, I'm teaching myself too that like it is okay to describe reality, even if it's deeply personal, even if it feels like scary and risky to say things out loud. But you know, I left a marriage that was very abusive and didn't even realize how fully abusive it was until I left it. And I had to call in like a pretty broad community of support. I mean, it felt broad to me because I had been hiding so much, you know, and I had hidden so much for so long. And when I called in that community of support, people to help hold me just through the process of being in a legal proceeding with my ex, which was a nightmare. You know, anyone who's ever been through a divorce, you know, divorce is traumatic, but then having to go through a nasty legal proceeding on top of that, it's really nightmarish, right? So I needed that community of support. And one of the things that I found in that process is that I really had to teach my support team how to support me because of the tendency in people to want to see my ex the way that they had always seen him, right? It was like, okay, I hear you, Autumn, that this is happening, but also there must be some other explanation for why he's doing this. And I would be like, there came points in my process where I had to say to my community, I would have to say to them, it doesn't matter if there's some other reason. There's no reason that you could ascribe to this that would make this okay. So you have to stop worrying about his reasons for what he's doing and show up for me, right? And there were some people who couldn't do that. You know, there were some people who really had a, you know, when we think about like somatic responses to stress, intensity, conflict, harm, you know, there are people who are towards people and there are people who are away people. And there were some people in my life who really like, you know, they could not handle what they were seeing. They couldn't handle it. And I'm grateful that I was able to pull in the people that I was able to pull in, right? And I'm thankful to the day I die that I had the circle that I had. But what I wish was different is I wish I didn't have to teach my community how to come towards me. Does that make sense? I wish that it was more broadly understood in all of our communities that when someone is in pain, that we don't rush away from that pain because it's bringing up and triggering all of our own stuff, that we get as close to it as possible. I wish that there were people who had circled up around him, right? Like the whole process would have looked really different if I had had support and he had had support. But people really pulled away from him. And that's how he got away with so much of what he got away with, right? Because there was no one watching. And so that's what I mean when I say moving towards it, that at a certain, and I understand that's a really, really personal story, but I think you can extrapolate that lesson to so many of the issues that we see in our movements, right? Like we kind of know something's going down, but we don't want that to get we don't want that residue on us. So we're going to go away as far away from that as possible, right? So that's what I mean. That's what I mean is taking responsibility for moving closer to where the pain is happening. And we do that well when it's directly related to the boundaries work, because I can move closely to someone else's pain if my boundaries are on point. If my boundaries aren't on point and I try to get all close to someone's pain, then I'm not really showing up for their pain. I'm showing up for mine, right? But if my boundaries are really clear, if I know what my field is, then I can move towards someone else's pain and help hold that.
I so appreciate that response, Autumn. It reminds me of, I can't remember who said this, but was also talking about understanding ourselves and our boundaries, where we begin and where we end and where we meet others. And it reminds me of what you were saying about how accountability can only happen in relationship, right? We have to be close to each other. We have to be in connection. We have to get up against that pain, in the pain of that fire, to be able to move through it and be transformed by it, as you were saying. So yes. I really want to thank you for expanding on that. And we had another comment from Abdirahman, who was asking for you to speak a little bit more on claiming our boundaries. What does that mean?
Oh, so good. Claiming our boundaries. Well, so before you can claim your boundary, you have to find it. And that's really hard. It's really hard. For me, it's been so I have worked for a number of years with a somatic experiencing therapist. And so the work that we do is very focused on nervous system regulation and understanding that all of my life experiences are held in the memory of my body, which is such a miracle, right? And that means that in the miracle of that, it means that my body has an enormous amount of intelligence about like what I can say yes to and what I can say no to. But, most of us move through the world like pretty dissociated it's like if you are a survivor of violence, if you come from a oppressed or marginalized community, you kind of have to dissociate a lot in order to be functional inside of racial capitalism. So there's this work we have to do that's about getting in touch with that body miracle that's giving us a lot of feedback about where's my yes, where's my no. And that's a really maybe oversimplified way, but I think a nice simple way to think about finding your boundary. It's about really finding your yes and finding your no. And it's not just about no. A boundary is not just about this is what I say no to. This is what's not allowed in my life. And these are the kind of people I don't fuck with. Excuse my language. Like, it's probably fine. But, it's also about like, this is my yes. This is how I know that I'm like resounding full body. Yes, I want to have dinner with that person. Yes, I want to be in this conversation right now, yes, I say yes to this conflict so that we can build our relationship even further and deeper. You know what I mean? That it's two sides of the same coin, and the miracle, again, the miracle of our bodies is that the information is there, but we have to learn to listen for it, right? From there, we begin to do the good work of learning how to like articulate it, right? Because I think what happens often in movements is that like we don't know how to name our boundaries in advance. So then people cross our boundaries and we're like, that person violated my boundaries. And it's just like, okay, well, that's probably, yes, that probably did happen. And also, you know, we have to know we have to know in the moment how to say no, yes, right? And it's a learning curve. I mean, I've had some experiences more recently over the years where I could feel myself getting it, and it feels so good. I'm share a tiny little story, but then hopefully we can take another question. But I had this experience. I was presenting at a national conference, and after the event was over, it was maybe like hours later, maybe the following day, I walked into a building. I was about to meet up with someone, and this white woman came walking towards me, and I could feel the energy. I could feel that she was about to bring me something that wasn't mine. I still wouldn't be able to tell you how I could feel it, but I know that most of the people in this room know what I'm talking about. You know, it's like, you know, when someone's bringing you something that's not yours, right? There's a way that people's eyes change. There's a kind of like leaning in and grasping energy, and I could feel it. And she walked up to me and she said, I want to talk to you about your presentation yesterday and an issue that I had with it. And I said, I don't have capacity for that conversation right now, but you can send me an email. And she said, well, it doesn't really feel like the kind of thing I would want to put in an email. And I was like, I don't have capacity to talk to you right now. And then I just walked away. And it was so wonderful. It was such a wonderful feeling to just be like, yes. I just walked away. I didn't get hooked, right? And then I was able to walk away not feeling angry at her, right? If I had collapsed in response to that interaction and felt like, oh, I have to. She's saying that she can't email this to me, and I have to hear her out because I was the teacher and she was the student and power dynamics and blah, blah, blah. Like, I have to hear her out. But instead I just said, no, just for me, no. It's not about her. It's just for me. And then I didn't have to feel any feelings about her. You know, I didn't have to blame her for anything. Yes, boundaries do build our confidence.
I love that. In the story that you told, I could just imagine the tentacles of this woman reaching out, trying to glom onto you, and able to just say, no, cast off your tentacles. And it reminded me of what you were saying about how boundaries it's our responsibility to hold our boundaries, right? That the importance of that. And also the power to be felt and claimed in doing that. Because I hear that in your story too. That if it had just been about feeling, well, that person didn't respect my boundaries, then you feel defeated, right? You feel trapped. And instead, in asserting your own boundaries, claiming where you want your presence to be and where you don't want it to be, both the yes and the no's, recognizing that in your body, in your spirit, there's such power and liberation. I mean, I hear that in your story.
Yes.
There was a connected question. I think I'll try to fit in two more, but I saw one that was connected to this boundaries piece from Emily that said, how do you navigate when people who are working in movements with you are saying no when you or your community are trying to move towards repair? I wonder if you have anything to share on that.
Could you read the question one more time?
Yeah, let me find it in the chat. I'm sorry, Emily. I was trying to capture your question by memory. How do you navigate people saying no to being in principled struggle together when you or your community is seeking repair?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that is so hard and so heartbreaking, right? I mean, and I think part of being in principled struggle is respecting a no, you know, even if you you know, we might receive a no, and our response to that no is like, but you would say yes if only you understood, then you would be willing to come to the table, you know, all those things. But I mean, if we want to build a culture of consent in our society, which ultimately is the culture that, you know, we've been in non-consent for generations. Like, we need to build a culture of consent. And if we're going to do that, it does start with us really respecting a no, even if we don't like where that no is coming from, right? And then demonstrating through our behavior that we are making repair, regardless of whether the other person is at the table, right? Because it's like, because I see that question, I'm like, oh, you're seeking repair. I don't know if you're seeking repair for something that your community organization did wrong, or whether you're seeking repair from because of something that someone else did, right? And that you want repair. I don't know which way it's going, right? But what I would say is, you know, like baseline with repair always is, you know, in order for repair to begin, harm has to stop. And so if you're on the end of having been, you know, accused of harm and you want to make repair, and the other person won't come to the table with you, very first thing to do is be like, all right, what can we stop doing? Right? What can we stop doing? What have we been told is not okay and we need to stop doing it? And how can we take our lesson, you know? I think that, and again, I don't know if what I just said is relevant to the person who asked the question, but it might be relevant to other people in the room. But I do think that this is one of those challenging places for us in movements right now, is like, and I see this with a lot of the clients that I work with, is like, we hear the lesson, but we have a really hard time taking our lessons. We have a really hard time taking our lessons right now. And because it's humbling, and it's hard to be humble in a culture that makes us all feel like we have to throw up the Instagram version of ourselves. You know, we don't live in a culture of humility or a culture that rewards humility. But taking our lesson means humbling ourselves.
Absolutely. For folks who know me on this call, they know that humility is a big thing for me, and vulnerability, because I think there's so much in the systems of oppression that we live in and are impacted by that keep us down by keeping us afraid of ourselves, right? The truth
Yes.
of ourselves. And
Yes.
so the last thing I think I want to try to wrap up just this amazing portion of our morning is a question, I think from Lile, who said, when you were talking about Black feminism and that fourth lesson around spiritual rigor and grasping, surrendering, sustaining, why is this process vital to regrouping as a community? Why is this process so vital to this time that we're in right now, this world on fire?
Why is spiritual rigor vital?
Mm-hmm.
To
that part of surrendering, to being humble to the fire of this moment.
I'm going to say something that has been on my mind for a few months now, but I haven't really talked about so much in public. There's something that we have to do right now in the world. And the phrase that keeps coming to my mind is decentering our own survival. Decentering our own survival, right? That the world is on fire, right? The world is folding us in. If I take seriously, and I do, if I take seriously an indigenous worldview about what is happening and what must be in order for the planet to heal, then I cannot keep moving as though me, my body, my family, my community, that my human life as it is the most important thing to continue, right? But that's really hard for us. Like, it's really hard for us to imagine a world that's not built around us as we are. I do think that if we are successful in decentering our survival, one of the like happy accidental outcomes could be that we end up surviving. That would be nice. But I don't, nothing is guaranteed. but we do have to act with the planet's best interests in mind. And I think, yes, we could be a lot less lonely. That's so true. And I think that the spiritual rigor is how we sit with that really, really painful truth of this moment in human history. Because it may be that the activity that we need to engage in is not the activity that we thought, right? Like it may be that we're in a period of like archiving and documenting ourselves and grieving ourselves, right? It may be that the most important spiritual activity of this time is different than what we thought, but we can only know that through a rigorous practice. And I think because we live in a very individualistic culture, we tend to have our spiritual journeys tend to be very like siloed. So there's some meeting that has to happen between like my personal spiritual journey and the rigorous approach to worldview that my community has to have as we move towards the end of what has been into whatever it is that's coming next. Now, I hope that made sense. I mean, I'm still trying to figure a lot of this out, right? But that's my best attempt.
Your best attempt is such a gift. I know we are at time, but I just want to express on behalf of everyone, I think, who is on this stream right now, how grateful we are to be in relationship with you this morning, how grateful we are for your presence, for your life, for your spirit. Thank you for the lessons that you've shared. Thank you for your humility and for continuing to identify and explore the questions with us, right? That hopefully we or our children will live into the answers someday.
Thank you for having me. And thank you, this beautiful community. I can just see by the way that you all are in the chat together. I'm like, oh, I can't wait to sit at your table someday. Beautiful, beautiful work, y'all.
Well, you are welcome at the table anytime. We hope to actually be at physical tables together with you in the not too far future, and sending a lot of love to you and yours, your family, your loved ones, our communities as a whole. Thank you, Autumn.
Bye, everyone.
All right, the rest of y'all don't leave me yet. If you need a bathroom break, I mean, please go ahead and do that. But we wanted to take just a few minutes before we get into the start of the first sessions, just to weave together some of the powerful threads that we've heard this morning, from opening with Fern and the stories that she so generously shared, to the grounding, the beautiful grounding by Kalayan, and wrapping with this keynote from Autumn that I know has moved so many of you who are on this stream today. I think that in all of the wisdom that we heard from each of the folks who have spoken this morning, a resounding thread that I heard was around really accepting with vulnerability and with humility the power of claiming our own presence and our own boundaries, our lineages, our traditions, what we learn from our ancestors, as well as what we learn from our children, and what it is that we are trying to build, not just for our own selves, what happens in our lifetimes, but in 7 generations forward. Right? So much of today, so much of the work that you all are doing, I think we know is more than the work of a single lifetime. That we know even the work where we picked up that torch, right, was built on the sacrifices, the learnings, the gifts that so many have given before us, that we stand upon those shoulders, and that we don't know the answers. We don't know what's on the other side of this world on fire. And yet, in order to find out, right, is leaning into that fire, is being willing to be transformed by that fire, is willing to be transparent and in relationship with one another and moving with each other, towards the pain, in order to come through that pain, and make real the world, the loving world that we envision. And so I hope that as we head into this next offering of sessions, which is focused on healing, that you will find a presentation or a workshop, a session that particularly speaks to you and what you are feeling most deeply in your work, in your lives, in your community at this time. I'd like to share a couple of kind of tech tips as well to help you actually be able to access the incredible sessions that we have lined up. If my wonderful team could help to bring up the slides just to show folks some of how this wonderful Hop-In platform works, that would be great. So right now we're on the main stage, and there are 3 tracks that are going to be coming up today. The first one around healing and connection, the second one around organizing and advocacy, and the third one is going to be around future visions that we're building for community. In between each of those sessions, we'll have these transition periods where, if you'd like, we can regroup as a whole community, talk about some of the threads that are interweaving amongst the various sessions before we move into the next session. And of course, there will be a lunch break. And for those of you who are online already, you're going to be receiving a Grubhub gift certificate so that you can get yourself some good food to nourish yourself as we're together today. We wish we could be in person, but since we can't, this was one way that we want to break bread together. On the screen with this nice screenshot, you can see that on the far left, it shows you a bar that lets you navigate back to the main stage, which is that second icon down. To get to the sessions, you'll click on the sessions, which is the middle icon right there. Thank you. And then if you want to reach out to somebody that you're seeing in one of the sessions, a new or an old friend, you can actually click on the networking button, which should allow you to reach out, direct message folks, get connected to people who you want to have deeper conversation with. On the far right, you should be able to see your agenda. Once you look at the sessions, you can add certain things to your agenda or calendar for the day so that you know what's coming up. There's also a chat thread for the entire event where folks can chime in at any time, sharing things that might have really struck you, perhaps questions that you had. There are also folks who are here as tech support. And if you have a question related to tech, you can put that into the thread as well, or just directly message someone who has tech support next to their name. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so when you get into the session, know that for most of the sessions, there is a presentation portion. So during that time, who you're going to see on screen are the speakers, which is what you just saw with Autumn, for instance, or with Fern earlier today. If there is a discussion or Q&A portion, you'll be able to request to share audio and video, which you're seeing that button right there. And there's a moderator on our team for each session who'll be able to let a certain number of people in at a time, just because the Hop-In platform has a limit on the number of people who can show up on screen at once, but we'll try to cycle through as well as we're able. Next slide, please. The other thing I should point out is at the end of the session, there is a little poll that will pop up so that you can very quickly share your responses to 3 short questions just to let us know what you liked about the session, what we could do to improve it. We want to capture that in real time so it's still fresh for you. And also know that there is translation interpretation available. That's on the far right of your screen. There's also cart captioning available in almost all of the sessions today. And so in the chat, there will be a link that will be pinned at the top that takes you to another screen where the captioning is available, and you can follow along on that while you're watching the presentation or session. Next slide. We might come to a point where there are no more next slides, but I can't remember how many there are. Again, for tech support, there's tech support in each session. You can direct message them. You can also email Caroline right at that email, which is on the screen here. And I think that gets us close to the end of these logistics. Let's see, is there any next slide? There we go. So that was a signal that there are no more next slides related to logistics. Hopefully you were able to absorb some of that. Of course, if you're like me and absorb just 1/10 of it, we are here to answer any questions that you have. And again, so excited for this day. We have an amazing lineup of speakers and presenters, but I also want to remind us all that this is a co-creation. This gathering is as powerful as what each of us are willing to bring to it. And you all are the gifts to myself, to our team, to each other, as we share the wisdom that we each have to offer in the work that we're doing in our lives and our community. So with that, I urge you to please go ahead and join a session that calls to you, and I'll look forward to seeing you again in about an hour back at the main stage. Thank you so much.